Right, so I've prepared some scenarios as shown on the left, and each of these scenarios will have a specific risk assessment and environmental and health and safety considerations that you'll have to make in order to take part in this activity. So the first activity you can see is climbing. You can pause the video now and read the scenario on the left. Now you've done that, the environmental considerations that this group have made is that they've made this area is Countryside Agency approved. This means that they're okay to be there, and they've made the right precautions to make sure that the environment is protected when they're climbing in that area. However, there is more weaknesses for this scenario to do with the environmental factors, that is, or considerations, I should say. The weaknesses for this are the route is regularly climbed. This then causes erosion to this area as it is constantly in use. So this basically means that the rock face is slowly wearing away where there is constant groups of climbers going up and down this wall in that specific spot. Also, animals are disturbed because the group are noisy as they're sort of cheering on their friends and classmates as they're climbing. They're shouting praise and things along those lines at their group members, which it just scares off the local wildlife. Then moving on to the safety considerations, there's a couple of strengths for this. The first of these, that a risk assessment is completed for the session, so all of the things are taken into account that could possibly go wrong, and these will have been addressed before the session has taken place. The second good point, or strength for the safety considerations, is that there is a qualified instructor taking them. So this instructor has taken all of the correct courses in order to become an official qualified instructor. So they will be able to teach all the correct techniques for everything and make sure all the participants are as safe as possible. Moving on to the weaknesses now. Some of the participants are unsupervised, as there's one, or these 2 points should be the same together, if they're essentially the same thing. Because this company that's running the climbing activity specifies that they need one instructor per each 15 participants. And then, as you can see from the scenario, there is 17 participants in this group. That means that they're understaffed in the amount of people there, and this one instructor is having to work too hard. This means that potentially there is 2 participants that aren't being looked after properly, or so the instructor could just be overwhelmed, which might mean that accidents can occur. Moving on to the risk assessment, as you can see, there's 2 risks have been identified, or 2 hazards, and then the specific risk assessment has been done for these. So first, these is falling from a high height, or a height. Oh, it is high height. Falling from the top of the wall. Participants who may be harmed. It should also say those watching, as the participant could fall on them. The existing control measures that are in place at the moment are all of the equipment is thoroughly checked before use and is renewed at the beginning of every season. So they get new gear, new ropes, new helmets, things like that. Severity of this and probability. The severity is free because it obviously falling from a height could potentially be life-threatening to the person that falls and someone that may be underneath and get hit by the person falling. So severity is 3, which is the highest. Probability is only 1, because this might not happen, or it's very unlikely to happen due to the fact that there is, or the fact that the equipment is thoroughly checked before use. Moving on to the next hazard, falling objects. So this could be rocks, anything that gets pulled down, so the debris that could fall from the rock face. People that may be harmed, the participants, the instructor and the onlookers. Helmets are to be worn by everyone in the vicinity, so that's everyone climbing, everyone instructing, everyone watching. there's a specific distance that everyone has to stand from the wall when someone is climbing to make sure that nothing falls down onto them while the person is climbing. It could be dislodged from the wall or something like that. Severity is free because, again, if you get hit by something that's falling from quite a high distance, or quite high I should say, sorry, could be potentially life-threatening again. Probability of this happening is only 1 because there's lots of precautions in place to prevent this from happening. However, the risk is then free, as it's quite dangerous. Suggested measures for improvement for this would be placing netting over the loose rubble or loose bits of the rock face, and also avoiding that specific part of the wall. So say the very top of the climb is very loose, the instructor should note this before this things start, or before the session starts, and that part of the wall should be avoided, or rock face. Alright, so moving on to the next scenario, you can now pause it and read the scenario, which is on the left. Right, now that you've done that, the environmental considerations that they have done, once again, it's a countryside agency approved area. It's been cleared for them to be able to be there, and they've made sure that nothing bad is going to happen to the environment from them being there. Due to the fact that lots of people like going skydiving, and it's obviously quite busy, pollution from the plane, so this could be sound pollution, this could be air pollution from fumes coming from the engine, or the noise. If the planes are constantly taking off, because there'll be a plane like every 15 minutes just taking off to take a next group up to jump. Another weakness is they landed in a nature reserve, which then caused damage to flora and fauna, or the protected plants and animals. They've been potentially damaged or harmed because they landed there. Moving on to the safety considerations, strength. They were all qualified instructors, and they all knew exactly how to teach properly, and the pilots were qualified as well. However, there are some weaknesses. This old safety equipment that is 3 years old and is not checked before its jump is used. This could potentially be life-threatening, as the equipment could be faulty. Moving on to the next, no guidelines on where to land as well, which also led to the flora and fauna disturbance as they landed in a nature reserve. Right, so the risk assessment for skydiving. Hazard parachute failure. This is possible to happen. It would harm skydivers and instructors as they fall from a plane. Existing control measures, continual parachute checks, so making sure before each jump that the parachutes are checked before they take off in the plane, and then before they jump out of the plane itself. Severity free, because you could potentially die from falling out of the plane. Probability of it happening, 1. Hardly ever hear about it. Risk free, obviously 1 times 3 is 3. Suggested measurements for improvement, although it says none there, I thought of one now, which would be to make sure that new equipment is brought at the beginning, or bought at the beginning of each season, so to make sure it's all brand new and there's nothing wrong with it. The next hazard is planes colliding, which has happened before. Skydiver, or people who may be harmed, skydivers, instructors, and the pilots. The existing control measures are set distance. The planes have to fly a set distance apart, and the pilots have to be fully qualified. Severity is free due to the fact this potentially kill people, and probability of happening 1, because it's very unlikely for 2 planes to collide while skydiving. Dropping people off, more dropping skydivers. Alright, so scenario 3 is kayaking. You can now pause it and read the scenario on the left. Right, now you've done that. The environmental considerations that they went through on this were they made sure that there was no pollution in the local area, so they did this by collecting their rubbish in their bags and then disposing of it later. They also made sure that they were quiet, so they prevented sound pollution, as they weren't shouting and screaming as they were paddling down the river. However, there are some weaknesses to the environmental considerations that they made for this activity. These are that there was no regard to the local area, as plants were destroyed when entering the river as they entered from the bank, instead of entering from a supplied ramp, so a concrete ramp that would be at a dock or where other, like a specified area to enter the water. Okay, moving on to the safety considerations of this, then. Strength of this, the staff member that took them was trained in the level 3 kayaking award, or instructor's award. However, they didn't. The weakness of this is they did not complete an AALA specified risk assessment for kayaking with a group of children. So, moving on to the risk assessment of this. The first hazard is weather changing conditions. Who may be harmed? The participants. If the fact that the weather change could, or the existing control measures of this, check weather before leaving and have an alternate water body to move the session to if the weather does change. Risk rating. Severity is 3 because it could cause drowning if the weather gets that bad. Probability is only 1. Suggested measure improvements. Just check the weather before sessions begin. Next hazard, getting upturned while in the kayak. Participants. Existing control measures. Sufficient training on how to know to become upright, and also having a buoyancy aid. So life jacket. Severity of this is 3 because you could obviously drown from this. Probability of it happening 1. Because it's very unlikely you're going to drown from it. So then, suggested measures of improvement, just go into detail on how to roll over, upright yourself. Right, so moving on to scenario 4. This is orienteering. You can pause it now and read the scenario on the left. Now that you've done that, the environmental considerations of this are, or the strengths of this are, the countryside code is being abided while they're performing this. So they closed the gates after they went through them. They made sure that they didn't scare or intimidate any of the animals grazing there, except the sheep and the cows. However, there are weaknesses to this, as they took a shortcut through a crow area, countryside right where it was not abided, because they went somewhere they weren't supposed to. This caused a human disturbance to the flora and the fauna, as they went through and disrupted the animals and plant life there. Safety considerations, strengths of this, there was a risk assessment done before Sussex Orienteering could run this activity. However, the weaknesses for this were, or was, I should say, that some of the groups did not have any members that were first aid trained. This meant that if any of them got injured, they would not be able to sufficiently help them, I guess. So, moving on to the risk assessment for this, hazard, or first hazard, is getting lost, or losing the track and getting lost, what should I say, group of orienteers. So, existing control measures, making sure the course's main points are clearly marked, and I should say hazardous routes should also be pointed out. Severity 1, you get lost, you'll find yourself home, or find your way home, or back where you're supposed to be, so it's not that severe. Probability of happening 1, you've got maps and compasses, you shouldn't be able to get lost. So risk 1. Suggested measure improvements, make sure you have a form of contact, so whether this is a mobile phone or a flare, something like that, that you'll be able to draw attention to yourself. Next hazard would be getting attacked by the animals that are grazing in that local area. The orienteers are obviously affected by that, or could potentially be harmed by that. Make sure all groups give animals plenty of space and don't make loud noises near them, as this might aggravate them or just intimidate them to the point where they feel they have to attack you or to survive or something like that. Severity 2, because you can be quite badly injured from an animal. And probability of this happening is 1, because it's not very likely that you'll upset an animal that much it will attack you. So the risk is 2. So then suggested measures for improvement would be avoid going near young animals and their mothers, as this could cause them to become worried for their child's safety or the young one's safety, so they might attack you for that reason. Done.